We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Welcome back to the Backwards History Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Will, here with my co-host, Kevin. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Shut up, Kevin.
All right.
No fight today? No.
I'm tired.
I get it. So, today, we're going to come to you with a discussion about something maybe a little bit controversial. Tiny bit. But something that's very obvious to anyone living in 2019 America and perhaps the world at large. There is a lot of money to be made in war, otherwise known as the military-industrial complex. Take it away, Kevin.
That's right. We've all heard about the military-industrial complex, either through movies, television. It gets tossed around a lot on news stations as well. But what none of those movies, TVs, or news stations do adequately is explain exactly what it is. Military-industrial complex has become more or less a buzz phrase or a buzzword, however you want to look at it. People hear it, but they don't really know what it means. So today we thought we'd take time to, explain some of the finer points of the military-industrial complex.
Breaking it down.
So when we start with the military-industrial complex, it finds its roots in the Industrial Revolution, which took off around 1750 in Great Britain. Now, try as they might, Great Britain tried to maintain this technological advantage over the rest of the world for as long as they could. But inevitably, the technology leaked out, and other countries started to industrialize, which means you move from an agricultural society more towards a industrialized one.
Well, first you have the Federal Reserve Act in 1912. And then a year following that, here we are in World War I.
The Great War.
In 1913. And then you turn around and, at least as far as America's concerned, we're right back in World War II by
1939.
We're not in by
us,
1939.
Right.
December 7th, 1941 was our official entrance into the World War.
But there was a lot of fighting going on prior to that we tried our best to ignore and remain neutral.
That's true. And then following World War II, we find ourselves in the Korean War, and Vietnam, the Cold War, Desert Storm, and Kosovo.
The War on Terror.
Yeah, the War on Terror after 9/11, which we'll talk about that later. But the part that's different about World War I and World War II is we didn't have a standing arms production prior to the end of World War II. Before that, we would just, at the time of a war being declared by Congress as it's supposed to be done.
It is written in one of these documents we're supposed to follow.
That we ignore all the time. I mean, we've been in war for the longest we've ever been at war right now.
Right.
And we never officially declared war at all because it was too hard to get it declared, so they just did it.
You basically go to war, but you refer to it as something else.
Right. But when we declared war for World War II, all of our production then starts being war production. You've got textiles stopping from being regular old textile plants to making uniforms, making all kinds of other stuff. You've got, few people listening may remember their grandmothers saving bacon grease and things of that nature to make oils and different things like that for productions of planes and tanks and yada yada. Following World War II, we have a standing arms industry. One of the most famous instances of it being mentioned was General or President Eisenhower in his farewell address said that we need to guard against the influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The striking part about that to me is it's his last foreseeable opportunity to speak to the American people. He was a general. He was the man that helped bring the end of the biggest war the world had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much bring around the start of what he coined as the military-industrial complex. Yet he was the one warning us against it. And we've seemingly just ignored it.
Very true. Similar to Washington's farewell address, he warns against political parties and intervening in foreign affairs. And once again, we've kind of like stuck our fingers in our ears and went, blah, 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 I can't hear you. And just did exactly the opposite of what they warned us against. But like you said, that these are presidents who this is their foreseeable last time in front of the mass American audience. And so this message is the one that has to be the most important or the nearest and dearest to their heart, which weighs the heaviest on their minds. And as you mentioned, a man who played a very pivotal role in World War II and bringing about the military-industrial complex, he's telling you, be careful, watch out. This could grow into something exponentially more dangerous than it is good.
Well, talking about it on a present-day standard, what happens is you've got these big corporations, and they do what's called lobbying for senators and congressmen and yada yada to get them to vote in certain ways on different bills and whatnot, or budgets.
Right, budget.
In order to get themselves more money. And they'll offer these politicians jobs with the corporation once they're done and they're in the political theater. So it's kind of a conflict of interest.
Oh, very much so. I like the term kickbacks. You know,
yeah.
I'll scratch your back, Senator, but down the road, I need a favor. You know?
Right. Like we'll contribute X amount of dollars to your campaign, but
we pretty much own you now.
Right. It's very much a Godfather-esque
Right.
situation. Like there will be a day I come calling on you, and you better, you know.
I'll need a favor.
Right.
But like you were saying, prior to the end of World War II, the whole country goes to war. You have your victory gardens. You have people willingly doing without and rationing to support the military. And then after World War II, you get much more of this privatized industry of the government and private companies together producing the war goods. And it's one of those things of if you make a product but there's no demand for it, what do?
You just have a surplus in product.
Or you can go and make a demand.
Or you sell it off to local police departments at a discount.
Or other countries.
Right. There's something me and Kevin found out, interestingly enough. After World War II, Ford, was it Henry or Gerald?
Oh, it was Henry.
It was Henry. Henry actually sued the United States government and won. Because during World War II, the United States government bombed Ford factories in Germany, building German tanks and vehicles and different things like that. They were building Nazi war equipment. So they were blown up by the
Allies,
the RAF and the American, I think it was the Army Air Corps at the time.
I think so, yeah.
And then sued the American government and won damages. Think about this. Ford, like the Ford, the blue oval on the back of your vehicle, that Ford was involved in making portions of the Nazi war machine. Now, we'll talk about that in a future episode and actually tell you how deep that rabbit hole goes.
And we'll get much more detail on that one.
But World War II was the proving ground for how
lucrative war is.
Right. Like, the same people were selling to both sides during the war. It was the Nazi war machine was a money-making industry for a lot of American industry. And that's been quietly swept under the rug.
And still, you won't find these stories in American textbooks, and they're not widely publicized.
Oh, one of the biggest Republican names around is Bush. Yeah. Granddaddy Bush, Prescott Bush, was actually the assets of the bank he worked for were seized and several other things because he was trading with the enemy. He was laundering money for the Nazi Party.
Playing both sides.
But then he went on to become a senator or a congressman for Texas.
I'm not really sure.
I don't remember what state it was right offhand. But yeah, that's also a story for another day.
Mm-hmm.
Just heads up, I'm not a fan of any of the Bushes.
Not a lot of people are.
You'd be surprised.
Well, you would be surprised. But it's one of those things, it's like it's family dynasty kind of in the making. But like I said, we'll get to that in a later episode.
We got to stop on this, or we're going to keep down this rabbit hole, and that's not the intent of this episode.
But if we look at things chronologically, like I said, 1750, the Industrial Revolution kicks off. And then you have people who, I had a college professor, he'd say these are folks who can see the big picture. And they start understanding that eventually we're going to have warfare on an industrial scale. And if you ever watched the movie Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows, they do a really good job of showing how this, how people can profit from war regardless of which side wins, which side loses, who dies, who lives. The bad guy Moriarty, through a series of plots and schemes, has amassed a number of businesses that produce weapons, bullets, bandages, a whole 9 yards. And he stands to make an ungodly sum of money once warfare breaks out. And while that is a fictitious storyline, there were people, once industrial warfare did break out, who profited massive amounts of money and didn't really care who they sold to, who they fought for, who they fought against, as long as the money came in.
I saw a comic last night that was very on the nose, very telling. It was two individuals. They didn't have them labeled, but they were understood to be politicians. And they had a bunch of small papers sitting around them, and the word bubble said, "Where else can we cut?" And they were obviously making a budget. Mm-hmm. There was a giant bull on the screen, a giant black bull in the comic, and on the side of it said military industrial complex, or military budget, or defense budget, and it was like $400 billion. And a lot of people, if you talk about, we should cut defense spending, they start screaming about troops' paychecks, and things of that nature. Well, yeah, but that's because your government's going to cut those because they're not going to dare cut their contracts with these fat cats at the defense contractor companies to pay the military, because they got to keep their job lined up for once they're out.
Right. They have a lot riding on these contracts, not only being signed but being reinstated once they run out. They have children who need jobs. Once the time comes, daddy's got connections. Where you want to work at?
War is a racket.
Mm-hmm.
War is a racket. We keep referencing this book, but it is so on the nose. It's scary, and it honestly kind of irritates me to read.
Yeah.
In the book 1984, the country is constantly at war, and who they're at war with constantly changes, but they never stop being at war because they need people to stay patriotic, I guess, for the lack of a better way to put it. And there's always a boogeyman.
Right. There's always this common enemy that we have to unite together against.
Right.
We all have to make sacrifices in order to remain, quote unquote, free.
Isn't it funny that we're constantly given a boogeyman?
Oh, all the time.
You had Adolf Hitler in World War II. You had Saddam Hussein in Desert Storm. You had Osama bin Laden
for a long time
for the War on Terror. And then you had Saddam Hussein again. And then we started thinking we were going to go to war with North Korea. So you had Kim Jong-un and then Kim Jong-il, or the other way around?
I think the other way around.
Okay. And now
Iran.
Now we've got our sights plainly set on Iran, and we're trying our best to start something up with Iran.
Just keep poking it with a stick.
Because support for the war in Iraq is starting to wane because we've been at war with Iraq and Afghanistan and in the Middle East, an open-ended war, because we're not at war with anybody. It's the war on terror.
Which
You're
doesn't
never going to beat terror.
right, and it's a perfect scenario to continue the war because there's no defined geographic area.
Right.
There's no defined enemy.
You can
It's
just
constantly
extend
changing.
to whoever now.
Right.
We're not at war with Iraq. We're not at war with Afghanistan. It's the war on terror. We're just going after whoever supports terrorists now. Funny, we've still not gone after Saudi Arabia,
True.
and they're behind a lot, or at least their finances are behind a lot of terrorist groups, but we still haven't touched them.
No.
Could it be because a lot of our politicians get funds sent to them from Saudi Arabia? Hillary Clinton. Right. It's irritating because, and I'm not, this is not a poke at the military. I come from a military family. I 100% support the troops. I do not support the politicians' mission for the troops. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we're told all the time that they are fighting for our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
If you repeat a lie enough times, you start to believe that lie.
Mm-hmm.
How are our guys and girls in the Middle East protecting our freedom? They're not. They're not at this point. They're protecting the interests of our politicians in the military-industrial complex.
A surprising statistic. Each state is allotted 2 senators. 50
Right.
states, 100 senators. All the way back to World War II. No senator's son or daughter who is in active military duty has ever been drafted or sent to war.
I ain't no senator's son.
Exactly.
Think about the sheer cost associated with even a short conflict. One of the smart munitions that we use, just one, on average, cost about $40,000, and that's a cheap one.
Wow.
Like one of the millions of nukes we have, or thousands of nukes we have. Of course, nukes aren't used that often, so this is just
At least I hope
just
not.
for a measure of how much this stuff can cost. Like $8 billion a piece, and we have like 30,000 nukes
that we know about.
that we're aware of. But this stuff is not cheap.
No,
Tanks are several $1,000s. I mean, think how much your car costs. Your car is like $30,000. How much you think a M1 Abrams tank's going to cost?
considerably more.
Right. And they're churning them out like they're going out of style.
Oh yeah.
So if you're a company that's making stuff, what do you try and do?
You try to keep selling.
You exactly. You try to drive the demand for your product.
Right.
What's the best way to drive demand for war?
You gotta have a war.
Start it.
Right. You gotta create a demand for what you're supplying.
Give them a boogeyman and they'll support it.
It's like we talked the other day, the Wolf of Wall Street, when he tells his buddy to sell him this pen. His buddy asks him for his signature. I don't have a pen. Boom. Supply and demand.
Right. War is a racket. Business is booming
Mm-hmm.
when you have your hands in the cookie jar. I know this is a little different mode for us. We're a little bit more stern
Right.
and somber on this one, but this one affects everybody
Truly.
because this stuff is paid for by who?
Taxpayer.
The government's not paying for this because the government doesn't have any money. They have our money.
Only what they take from us.
And every time one of those bombs blows up some people, your money was used to do it. My money was used to do it. And I don't necessarily agree with every instance of it being used.
Same.
But that's because I've looked into things. Most people just say, oh, well, they knocked down the World Trade Center, which they may or may not have. But America,
Right.
it's time to go. Let's go kill some terrorists. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists.
Right.
Right.
There's no middle ground.
Right. Can patriotism and skepticism of what your government's doing coexist? I think it can.
I think it can, but given our current geopolitical climate, it's going to be difficult because it's like you just said, you're either with us or with them. There's no reaching across the aisles anymore. It's
that's because
red or blue.
Right, exactly. We've dumbed ourselves down to either you're Democrat or you're Republican, and if you're neither, and you vote for something other than that, you're wasting your vote.
Right.
Well, that's the thing is that of all the people who it's not even like 30% of people vote.
It's very low.
It's less than 30% of people vote in each election. Imagine if everybody who felt like they were not being heard voted for a party outside of the two mains.
Well, you could really see some change happen then.
Right, because then views that are contrary to this left-right, heads or tails situation could prevail.
That's the problem with a two-party system. You have a complex problem, you normally only get presented with two options to solve.
It becomes a team sport. It becomes, Auburn, Alabama. It becomes Mississippi State and Ole Miss. It becomes, my team's better than yours, not, oh, this is what's best for us.
Right. Let's sit down and discuss this logically, rationally.
It becomes a party deal. It's like, oh, well, you're wearing a blue tie, I'm wearing a red tie. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you have to say. I don't care whether it's a good idea or not. I'm going to go against you just because you are not on the same team as me.
I'm going to oppose your idea not based on its merits, but based on who came up with it.
Right. And we're destroying ourselves with that, and we're destroying it on a daily basis.
Giving into that mob mentality that a lot of founding fathers were very, very afraid of.
And you kind of wonder if it's intentional. If you keep the people divided, they'll
see
never
what you're
stop
doing in the
you.
shadows.
Yeah.
Right. They're too busy fighting with each other to fight you.
I saw something that said that politics is the entertainment sector of the military-industrial complex.
Well said. Very well said.
And I think that's a good place to leave it.
I think you're right.
But don't take our word for anything we've said today.
Never.
Look it up. Find out how much this stuff really is costing. Find out why we're still in places that we are. Find out what we're actually protecting in Afghanistan. And it's not freedom. Looks like poppy fields to me.
Oh, yeah.
That's a subject for another episode.
Indeed.
So, as always, don't take our word for anything. Look it up for yourself. Mm-hmm. Trust, but verify.